If you're over 50 and you wake up every morning doing what you've always done, reaching for your phone, swallowing your medications, starting your day, I need you to stop for a moment. Because there are 4 things that happen in the first 30 minutes after you open your eyes that your cardiologist may never have sat down and warned you about directly. And here's what makes this so important. None of them are dramatic. None of them look dangerous. They feel like ordinary, unremarkable parts of starting the day. That is exactly what makes them so easy to miss. I've seen patients walk out of a perfectly fine annual checkup, get a green light on their blood work, and still go home and do one of these 4 things every single morning unknowingly, stacking extra cardiovascular pressure on top of the one window of the day when their heart is already under the most strain. My name is Dr. Elias, and for the last 2 decades, I have worked specifically in preventive cardiovascular health for adults over 50. This video is about that window, the first 30 to 60 minutes of your morning, and 4 habits hiding inside it that the research says are meaningfully raising the risk of a heart attack or stroke. Stay with me through all 4, because the third one is not what most people expect, and the fourth one is the one that I believe could genuinely change how you think about your own morning routine starting tomorrow. Let's get into it. Before we go through the 4 habits, I need to tell you about a patient. I'll call him Gerald, 63 years old, retired teacher. Gerald came to see me not because he was in crisis, but because his daughter had noticed something. She told me, "My father seems perfectly fine by 10 in the morning, but every day in the first hour he looks pale, he moves slowly, and twice in the last month he's had to sit down suddenly after breakfast." Most doctors would have looked at Gerald's blood pressure logs, which were reasonable, his cholesterol numbers, which were managed, and said, "Gerald, you're fine." But what Gerald's daughter had spotted without knowing it was a pattern, and that pattern pointed directly at this morning window. I want you to keep Gerald in mind as we go through each of these 4 habits today, because by the time we reach the last one, you'll understand exactly what was happening to him and what a single simple change did about it. Quick pause. If you're new here, this channel is built entirely around practical, research-based health information for adults over 50. No extremes, no fear-mongering, just the honest picture. Subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming up. And let's keep going. Here is the biological reality that most morning health conversations never quite spell out clearly enough. Your heart doesn't wake up at the same pace you do. During sleep, your blood pressure drops, your heart rate slows, your arteries relax. Researchers who study 24-hour blood pressure patterns, a field called ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, have consistently documented what they call the morning blood pressure surge, a rapid, steep rise in both blood pressure and heart rate that begins roughly 30 to 60 minutes before waking and accelerates in the minutes immediately after. This surge is not a malfunction. It's your body doing exactly what it's supposed to do, preparing your organs for the demands of being upright, alert, and active. Cortisol rises, adrenaline rises, your blood thickens slightly because you've been 8 hours without water. Your platelets, the cells involved in clotting, become temporarily stickier. Now here is where the research gets genuinely important. A landmark analysis published in the European Heart Journal documented that major cardiovascular events, heart attacks and strokes, cluster heavily in the first 3 to 6 hours after waking, occurring at a rate roughly 40% higher than what you'd expect if they were distributed randomly across the day. That is not coincidence. That is the biology of this window. And critically, 2 people can have identical average blood pressure readings for the entire day and still face very different levels of risk depending on how sharply their pressure spikes in those first minutes of waking. A more dramatic surge means more stress on vessel walls that may already be stiffened or narrowed from years of elevated pressure or arterial changes that come with age. What you do in that window either adds to that natural physiological load or it doesn't. Before we move on, drop your name and your age in the comments. I'd love to know who I'm talking to today. Here are 4 specific habits that add to it in ways most people never realize. Habit first, reaching for your phone the moment you wake up. The first habit is the first thing millions of people do before their feet even touch the floor. They reach for their phone. Margaret was 67 years old. She'd been managing blood pressure with medication for 4 years and doing well. But she told me that every morning before she even sat up, She was scrolling through news headlines, notifications, sometimes emails, before she'd even had a glass of water. She said, and I remember this clearly, "It's just how I wake up now. It doesn't stress me out." Here is why that matters in a way that has nothing to do with screens being generally bad for you. Your cortisol awakening response, the natural spike in cortisol that occurs in the 30 minutes after you wake, is one of the key drivers of the morning blood pressure surge. This is well documented in neuroendocrinology research. It's your body's internal alarm system transitioning you from rest to readiness. Now, the moment you pick up your phone and see a news alert, an unopened email, a message requiring a response, even if you don't consciously feel stressed, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, activates. Research from the American Psychological Association and separately from cortisol response studies has shown that exposure to negative news content or social comparison in the morning produces a measurable additional cortisol spike beyond your natural awakening response. You are stacking a stress hormone surge on top of a cardiovascular surge during the exact window when your blood pressure and adrenaline are already climbing on their own. And here's the part Margaret hadn't considered. Your arteries don't know whether you're stressed about a work email or about a saber-toothed tiger. They respond the same way: vasoconstriction, increased cardiac output, elevated blood pressure, morning after morning, year after year. A 2022 study in the journal Circulation found that high-frequency exposure to emotionally activating digital media in the morning was associated with sustained elevations in morning blood pressure that persisted significantly, longer into the day compared to mornings without phone exposure. That's not a trivial finding. The practical fix is straightforward. Give yourself a 20-minute phone-free window after waking, not because phones are the enemy, but because your cardiovascular system is navigating its most demanding daily transition right now, and injecting emotional or informational stimulation into that window asks it to do two demanding things simultaneously instead of one. If you want a concrete way to use that 20 minutes, instead sit up slowly, hydrate, do 3 to 5 minutes of quiet, unhurried breathing. Let the natural surge do its job without assistance. The mistake most people make, exactly like Margaret, is assuming that because they don't feel acutely stressed by their phone, no physiological stress response is happening. That is not how cortisol works, and it is not how the morning surge works. Habit 2, taking your blood pressure medication at the wrong time. Now this one I want you to pay close attention to, especially if you are currently on any blood pressure medication, and statistically, a significant portion of adults over 60 are. Most people take their blood pressure medication in the morning. They do it that way because that's when their doctor first told them to take it, because it's easy to remember with breakfast, and because on the surface it seems logical. Take it in the morning when your blood pressure is highest. But the research on this has shifted in ways that have not yet fully filtered down into routine medical practice. Here is the concept. Chronotherapy, timing medications to align with your body's biological rhythms, rather than simply taking them at a fixed clock time, regardless of what your physiology is doing. A major clinical study called the Hegia Chronotherapy Trial, published in the European Heart Journal in 2020 and involving nearly 20,000 patients followed over 6 years, found that people who took their antihypertensive medications at bedtime rather than in the morning had a dramatically lower rate of major cardiovascular events, including heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death, compared to those who took the same medications in the morning. The difference was not small. The bedtime group showed approximately a 45% lower risk of major cardiovascular events over the follow-up period. Now, important note here, and I want to be precise about this, the Hegia trial has been scrutinized by some researchers for methodology, and subsequent studies have shown more mixed results. A 2022 trial called Time did not replicate the same dramatic reduction, so the science is still being refined. That is honest, and that is what I'll always give you here. But here is what is not controversial at all. For some patients, particularly those whose blood pressure doesn't dip normally during sleep, what doctors call non-dippers taking medication in the morning may mean their overnight blood pressure remains inadequately controlled, and then the morning surge arrives on top of already elevated nighttime pressure. Your doctor can check whether you are a dipper or a non-dipper using a simple 24-hour pressure monitor. Many patients have never had this test even after years of blood pressure management, and that information directly changes whether your medication timing is optimized for your biology. Walter was 71, a retired engineer who had been on the same blood pressure medication for 8 years. His daytime readings were controlled, but a 24-hour monitor showed his nighttime pressure barely dropped at all, and his morning spike was steep. We adjusted his medication timing. Within 60 days, his morning readings had meaningfully improved. The practical fix here is not to change your medication on your own. I want to be very clear about that. Do not adjust your own medication timing without speaking to your physician first, because the right timing depends on which medication you're taking, your specific blood pressure pattern, and other individual factors your doctor needs to assess. What you can do immediately is bring this to your next appointment and ask these specific words. Based on my blood pressure pattern, is my current medication timing optimized? And should I consider a 24-hour blood pressure monitor to check my overnight readings? That single question could be one of the most important ones you've asked in years. If you're still watching and this is helping you, type the number 2 in the comments so I know you're here with me. Habit 3, eating a high sugar breakfast. I told you the third one would surprise most people. Here it is. The first food your body receives in the morning, specifically, its glycemic impact has a direct and measurable effect on your cardiovascular system during the exact window we've been discussing. Ellen was 59. She came to see me for a routine cardiovascular screening after a family history of heart disease. She described herself as health conscious. She ate oatmeal with fruit in the morning, had a glass of orange juice, sometimes a low-fat yogurt. In her mind, she was doing everything right. When I asked her to describe the specific form of that oatmeal instant packets, flavored variety, and that orange juice, a full 12-ounce glass, I recognized a pattern that shows up regularly in my patient population. She wasn't eating badly by general standards, but her breakfast, as she'd constructed it, was generating a significant glycemic spike almost immediately. Here is the mechanism. When you eat a high glycemic meal, one that converts rapidly to blood sugar, your pancreas releases a surge of insulin in response. That insulin surge triggers activation of your sympathetic nervous system, producing an additional increase in heart rate and blood pressure. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has documented that high glycemic index breakfasts produce meaningfully greater post-meal sympathetic nervous system activity compared to low glycemic alternatives. You are, again, stacking a metabolic stimulus on top of the natural morning cardiovascular surge. And in adults over 50, especially those with any degree of insulin resistance, which becomes increasingly common with age, that insulin response is often larger and more prolonged than it would be in a younger person, meaning the sympathetic activation lasts longer into the morning. Over years, research from the Predimed study, a major European dietary intervention trial, has linked high dietary glycemic load with meaningfully increased risk of cardiovascular events, particularly in older adults with existing cardiovascular risk factors. The practical fix does not require giving up breakfast or following a restrictive diet. It requires understanding what makes a breakfast genuinely heart protective in the morning specifically. Prioritize protein and healthy fat in your first meal. Eggs, nuts, full-fat, unsweetened Greek yogurt. Add fiber that slows glucose absorption, oats in their whole rolled form rather than instant, berries rather than juice. Avoid the liquid sugars, orange juice, sweetened coffee drinks, flavored yogurts that spike blood glucose very rapidly. Ellen made this adjustment. She switched to 2 eggs with half an avocado and whole rolled oats with no added sugar. She told me 3 weeks later that she felt measurably more steady and clear-headed in the morning hours. That steadiness wasn't just subjective, it tracks with what the research predicts about reduced post-meal sympathetic activation. Habit 4, ignoring the body's morning warning signals. This is the one I see bypassed more than any other, and it is the one that has the most serious consequences when it is ignored. Every morning, your body is communicating with you during this vulnerability window. And a significant number of people over 50 have developed a habit of dismissing, rationalizing, or simply not recognizing what those signals mean. Let me tell you about the signal most commonly mistaken for something ordinary: morning jaw pain or neck tightness that is not there when you go to sleep, unusual fatigue in the first hour after waking that feels different from simply not being a morning person, a brief sensation of pressure or heaviness across the chest or upper back that seems to pass once you start moving, occasionally a cold sweat that appears before you've done anything physically demanding. These are not guaranteed signs of a cardiac event. Let me be precise about that. Jaw pain in the morning can be a dental issue. Fatigue in the morning can be poor sleep. None of these symptoms individually mean something catastrophic is about to happen. But here is what the research is very clear about. A 2019 review published in JAMA Cardiology identified that a pattern of transient morning symptoms that appear in the first 1 to 2 hours after waking and either resolve or are rationalized away preceded documented cardiac events in a significant portion of patients, and that the average delay between first symptom and seeking care was over 2 hours. 2 hours. In a window when treatment speed is one of the most critical determinants of outcome. Gerald, the patient I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Gerald's daughter had noticed something specific. He was pale and slow in the mornings and had sat down suddenly twice in the past month. When I did Gerald's workup, I found significant coronary artery narrowing that his routine blood work and resting EKG had not flagged. His morning symptoms were his body signaling a cardiovascular system working at the edge of its capacity during the one window of the day when demand was highest. Gerald had been rationalizing those mornings for months. The practical fix here is not about fear. It is about building a morning self-check habit. Every morning for 30 seconds, ask yourself 3 questions after you've been up for 15 to 20 minutes. 1. Do I feel any unusual discomfort in my chest, jaw, neck, or upper back? 2. Am I unusually short of breath for what I'm doing right now? 3. Does something feel genuinely different this morning compared to my baseline? If the answer to any of those is yes, and it persists beyond 5 minutes, do not wait. Do not attribute it to indigestion. Do not lie back down and hope it passes. Call for help. I've said this to patients for 20 years. The moments that matter most are not the ones you're already alarmed about. They are the ones you're in the process of talking yourself out of. If you've made it this far and you're getting value from this, type the number 4 in the comments. Here is your practical challenge for the next 30 days. 4 adjustments, 1 for each habit we've covered. First, create a 20-minute phone-free buffer after waking. Let your cortisol surge do its job undisturbed. Second, ask your doctor specifically about your blood pressure medication timing and whether a 24-hour ambulatory monitor makes sense for your situation. Third, restructure your first meal to lead with protein, fiber, and healthy fat rather than high glycemic carbohydrates and liquid sugars. Fourth, build a 30-second morning self-check into your routine every single morning and take unusual, persistent symptoms seriously. And bring these 5 questions to your next appointment. 1, is my morning blood pressure surge something we should specifically track with a home monitor? 2, has my medication timing ever been evaluated in light of my overnight blood pressure pattern? 3, am I experiencing any morning symptoms I should be logging and reporting? 4, given my current cardiovascular risk profile, is my breakfast composition something we should discuss? 5, what specific morning symptoms should I treat as an emergency rather than something to wait on? You've probably never thought of the first 30 minutes of your day as a cardiovascular health decision, but that is exactly what the research says it is. Morning after morning, year after year, whether anyone is paying attention to it or not. None of what I've described today is extreme. It does not require overhauling your life. It requires understanding what your body is doing in that specific window and making 4 small, sustainable choices that work with it rather than against it. Start tomorrow morning with 1 change. That is genuinely all it takes to begin. Now, before you close this video, I want to ask you something. Think about the people in your life right now. A spouse who reaches for the phone before they've even sat up. A sibling who's been on blood pressure medication for years and has never once had a conversation about when they take it. A close friend who starts every morning with orange juice and instant oatmeal and calls it healthy. These 4 habits are not rare. They are everywhere, and most of the people doing them have simply never had this explained to them clearly. If someone you care about came to mind just now, share this video with them. Not as a warning, not to alarm them, just as something worth 18 minutes of their morning. Because the conversation this video starts between them and their doctor could genuinely matter. That share button costs you nothing, and it might mean everything to someone you love. And if this gave you something useful today, if even one part of this shifted how you're thinking about your mornings, hit the like button right now. It tells me this kind of content is worth making more of, and it helps this channel reach other adults over 50 who need exactly this kind of honest, practical information and aren't finding it anywhere else. Finally, if you're not subscribed yet, do that now. This channel exists for one reason: to give adults over 50 the clear, calm, research-based health picture that too often gets skipped over in a routine 15-minute appointment. No extremes, no fear, just the real information you deserve to have. I'll see you in the next one.